Support for Radio Friends comes from OsteoStrong. Improvements in bone density, strength, and power can be achieved by weekly 5-minute no-sweat sessions on their 4-spectrum machines. These isometric robotic machines safely emulate high-impact loading on different parts of the skeletal system, which stimulates activity in bone-building cells. Balance and agility can be improved by 2-minute sessions on vibration plates. Every session is supervised by a trained coach. Learn more on Facebook or call to set up a complimentary wellness assessment and session. Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on this St. Patrick's Day, Thursday, March the 17th. Good to have you with us. And to honor St. Patrick's Day, we have none other than Larry Brown with us.
Well, good morning.
Wearing a shirt that you bought in Ireland.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
an Irish shirt.
So
Yes.
it's an Irish shirt and you've got an Irish story, right?
Of course.
Good to have you here, Larry.
Good to be here.
What's the name of the story?
The Giant Steps.
All right. So here it is, a St. Patrick's Day story called The Giant Steps with Larry Brown.
Now, there's a location in Ireland between West Pass and Cork on the estuary of the River Lee, in the what used to be the barony of Kerry-Cunnahy. And today you might see the ruins of what at one time had been the Ronayne Court, where there Maurice and Margaret had lived and had raised their one son, Philip. And from his birth, they knew he was very intelligent. In fact, he learned to read and write very early. But when he was 7 years old, he disappeared. Now, the Ronaynes were wealthy enough that they had employees and they had friends and neighbors, and they did a tremendous search of the whole area for days and could not find him. And so sadly had to give him up for dead. It was a number of years later that a very skilled blacksmith by the name of Robin Kelly, who was also an interpreter of dreams, had a dream himself. And in that dream, Robin saw what he thought was Philip Ronayne astride a white horse. And he announced in the dream to Robin, "I am the page of the giant Mayan MacMahon, and my 7 years' term of service is up, so you must release me, and I will see that you are rewarded greatly." And at the end of the dream, he was kicked by the horse in the head, such that it left an imprint of a horseshoe on his forehead. Now, when he woke up, and there he felt where he had been kicked, and now he had been used to interpreting other people's dreams, and now Robin was going to have to interpret his own. And he remembered that it had been several years ago that young Philip had disappeared. And he knew what he must do. He set out toward what had been the legendary location of the giant Mayan MacMahon. You see, along the River Lee, you go out to the very southwestern tip of Ireland, and there at what today is called Mizzen Head were giant rocks that looked like steps leading up to the cliff. And it was believed that the giant MacMahon lived in a castle somewhere up on those cliffs. But it was only visible at the right stroke of midnight. Well, Robin knew what he must do. He went to the village of Moncton and there got a friend, Tom Clancy, who had a boat. And they ventured along the estuary all the way out to Mizzen Head, and there were the giant steps. But it was the middle of the night, and they had but one lantern. And as they held the lantern up, those chunks of stone, as it went up, looked like huge houses. And they looked to see if anything would appear at midnight. And the tide was out, and they saw what appeared to be a dark cave, maybe a tunnel, and there seemed to be a speck of light back in there. And so Robin left the boat, headed up toward that, as he was holding his lantern, stepping into these stones that seemed to be like grotesque stone figures that were rolling about. And he was afraid as if it was closing in, but he followed that point of light. He'd gone into the cave when he heard his name called out. "Robin, Robin, what a fool you are. What fortune do you seek?" And for a moment Robin was fearful that he should go any further, but he proceeded on. And soon he came to a large stone chamber, and there were these huge giants sitting around this stone table. And the one he recognized must be Mahan MacMahon, had a huge beard that seemed to grow into the rocks. And as he stood before them, the giant stood up, and as his beard pulled out of the rocks, rocks shattered and flew around. And the giant said, "And why are you here? Who do you seek? What do you seek?" And Robin said, I've come for young Philip Ronayne, because I understand his term of service as your page is over." And the giant laughed and said, "Oh, yes, well, I'll let you choose him. Come with me." And the giant took him to another huge chamber, and there were rows and rows of children, 360 in all about 7 years old, and all dressed in green, exactly the same. And the giant said, "Well, if you can pick out Philip, you may have him, but you only have one choice. And if you're wrong, you will be under my employ." Now, I remind you that Robin was a blacksmith. And before venturing out on his journey, he thought maybe he ought to have something for his protection. And so he had taken one of the plow irons, a rod of steel that he'd used to make plows with. And he had it, and he thought, maybe I might need this. But as the giant looked at him, and he was fearful of what the giant might do, he said, maybe it would be best if I try to befriend the giant. And he said, "Oh, well, all these children look like they're doing quite well under your care." And the giant said, "Well, I see you are an honest fellow." And the giant reached out his hand toward Robin. And Robin, seeing the size of that giant's hand and knowing what it could do to him, he remembered he had the plow iron. And he pulled out that rod of iron and put it into the giant's hand. And the giant took a hold of it, looked at it, and just twisted and turned it like it was a stalk of grain. But at that moment, all of the children laughed. And Robin thought he heard his name called out by one of the children. And so Robin went over and put his hand on the one child from whom he thought he heard his name called. And when he touched that child, all the other children said, "It is Philip! It is Philip!" And at that moment, all got dark, and as if rocks were falling down from everywhere, thundering and thundering. And in that next instant, Robin realized he was outside holding the child. He and Tom took the boat back, and when they got back to the barony of Carrie Cullinane, there all the people rejoiced. But Philip had not appeared to age at all in all these years, and he was talking as if it was just yesterday. Well, Robin was greatly rewarded, and young Philip, he grew up to be a wise old man, and as I understand it, skilled as a blacksmith.
Very good. And cutting it right to the wire, too, Larry Brown. Pleasure to have you. And a great St. Patrick's Day story. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you, and thank you for listening today. Have yourself a nice morning. Bye-bye.